They locked the human inside before anyone told him this was not a training room. The door sealed behind Caleb Walker with a sound like a verdict, and every member of Black Talon turned to look at him as if command had just delivered a joke in uniform. He stood alone on the white floor of Bay 9, 5 feet 11, plain brown hair, travel dust on his boots, one duffel bag hanging from his right hand. No armor, no escort, no rank anyone here respected. Above him, the observation glass darkened, which meant the brass wanted to watch without being seen. Commander Threx Vero did not move from the center platform. He was 8 feet of old war scars, silver command plates, and the kind of silence that made younger soldiers check their posture. Around him waited the deadliest squad in the Alliance, 7 alien operators whose records were so classified even I had only seen the blacked-out versions. And then there was Caleb, blinking under the lights like some tired airline passenger who had walked through the wrong gate. Krax laughed first. Of course he did. Krax always needed the room to know he was not impressed. He stepped forward, lowered his horned head until his shadow covered the human's boots, and dropped a small metal patch at Caleb's feet. It was the temporary recruit marker. Not handed to him. Dropped. The patch spun twice, clicked once, and lay there between them. Pick it up, Softbone, Krax said. Nobody corrected him. Not Threx. Not the officers behind the glass. Not me. I was standing to the left of the weapons rack, arms folded, already writing the first line of the report in my head. Human candidate lacks appropriate survival instincts. Recommend immediate removal. That was the polite version. The honest version was simpler. Someone had sent this man here to fail. The question was why. Caleb looked down at the patch for a long moment. He did not bend. He did not square his shoulders. He did not do that fragile little human thing where pride tries to stand taller than fear. He just studied the floor, the patch, the distance between Krax's feet, the angle of the overhead vents, and the emergency lights above the west wall. His eyes moved once, maybe twice, but I saw it. I had spent 19 years reading rooms before rooms became battlefields, and this human was not looking for permission. He was mapping exits. Threx finally spoke. Caleb Walker of Earth, you have been assigned to Black Talon for survivability evaluation. His voice carried across the bay, flat and official. You will follow every order, answer every command, and understand that this unit does not slow down for political experiments. Caleb raised his eyes. Understood. That was all. One word. No anger. No fear. No performance. Somehow that made Krax smile wider, like he had mistaken calm for emptiness. First order, Krax said, tapping the patch with one claw. Earn the right to wear that. Caleb looked at him, then at Threx, then toward the black observation glass where hidden officials waited for the first crack in his face. For half a second, something passed over him. Not panic, not arrogance. Recognition. Like he had seen this exact kind of room before and had not liked what happened next. Then Caleb set his duffel down with careful hands and asked, before we begin, is the ventilation system tied to the fire suppression grid or life support? The laugh died so fast the bay seemed to lose air. For 3 full seconds, nobody answered him. That was the first thing Caleb Walker did to Black Talon. Not a strike, not a speech, not some proud little declaration about Earth. He asked a maintenance question, and every veteran in that base suddenly remembered that buildings kill more soldiers than enemies ever do. Commander Threx turned his head slightly toward me. I was the tactical analyst, which meant inconvenient questions became my problem. Fire suppression is separate, I said. Life support has a manual override behind the north panel. Caleb nodded once, like he had just confirmed the location of a bathroom in a restaurant, then crouched and picked up the recruit patch Krax had dropped. He did not dust it off dramatically. He did not glare. He rubbed his thumb across the scratched metal, noticed the bent clasp, and pressed it back into shape with patient pressure. That bothered me more than it should have. Most species either bristled under insult or swallowed it. Caleb treated insult like weather. Unpleasant. Temporary. Not worth giving his whole face to. He fixed the clasp, attached the patch to his jacket, then reached into his duffel and pulled out 3 things. A folded gray shirt, a small tin of coffee grounds sealed with tape, and a photograph worn soft at the corners. He saw me see it, and his hand paused. Not long. Just enough. The photograph disappeared into an inner pocket before my eyes could steal details. But I caught a porch railing, sunlight, and a little girl with missing front teeth holding up 2 fingers behind someone's head. Caleb zipped the pocket shut, as if closing a door. Sentimental objects are not permitted in active evaluation, Cracks said. Caleb looked at him. Then write me up. The bay went still again, but not because the answer was loud. It was quiet, almost tired, like a man who had been obeying rules for years and had finally found one too small to respect. Threx watched him more closely after that. So did I? Caleb moved toward the preparation bench where candidates usually found their gear. He checked every strap, every seam, every oxygen seal, not quickly, but with the care of someone who had learned that small failures waited patiently for tired people. His fingers stopped on a cracked pressure tab. He did not announce it. He simply removed the faulty piece and placed it on the edge of the bench where the quartermaster drone would find it. Then he looked down and noticed something none of us had. One of the junior techs, a blue-skinned Volari barely old enough to hold a tool license, had dropped a case of sensor pins beside the rack. The pins had scattered under Crax's boots. The child froze, terrified to crawl near him. Caleb crossed the room, knelt, and began picking them up. Crax stared down at him. You enjoy being on the floor, human? Caleb handed the pins back to the tech one by one. I enjoy people not getting blamed for something I can fix in 10 seconds. The tech whispered thanks. Caleb gave him the smallest smile, then stood too fast and hit a wince behind his shoulder. There it was. A limit. Some old injury along the ribs. Maybe lower back. He covered it well, but not perfectly. Perfect soldiers are usually lying. Real ones leak truth in the spaces between movements. Threx saw it too. You are injured, he said. I am functional, Caleb replied. Not healed. Not fine. Functional. The word landed in my head like a locked file. Then the wall speaker clicked, though no one had touched the control panel. A burst of static passed through the bay, faint enough that most of the squad ignored it. Caleb did not. His eyes lifted to the black observation glass, then to the ceiling vent above it. His breathing changed once. Only once. And before the rest of us heard anything at all, Caleb quietly moved the Volari tech behind him. The static lasted less than 2 seconds, but Caleb reacted to it like a door opening in a dark house. He shifted the Volari tech behind his shoulder, placed one hand lightly against the workbench, and looked up at the vent above the observation glass. Nobody else moved. That was our second mistake. The first was assuming his caution was fear. Behind the black glass, the senior evaluators made their decision before the room had time to breathe. Their voices came through the overhead speakers, polished and official, the way powerful people sound when they have already decided the outcome and only need witnesses. Candidate Walker has demonstrated environmental anxiety, delayed compliance, and fixation on structural systems unrelated to direct combat readiness. The words hung over Caleb like a sentence. Crack smiled. Several others in the squad made low sounds of amusement. Even I understood the logic. The Alliance had spent 70 years building evaluation models from battlefield survivors, command reports, neurological scans, and casualty patterns across 49 species. The data was not foolish. It was respected. It said strong soldiers moved toward threats, not vents. It said hesitation predicted collapse. It said candidates who overchecked equipment often froze when conditions changed. And according to that same data, humans were useful in endurance operations, emergency medicine, and morale cohesion, but unreliable in high-speed shock combat. Soft tissue, slow reflex profile, emotional attachment bias, single heart, no natural armor. The model had numbers, charts, and 3 decorated admirals behind it. Caleb had a duffel bag and a bent recruit patch. I hated how reasonable the mistake looked. Commander Threx stepped forward. You heard the assessment. Caleb kept his eyes on the vent for one more beat before facing him. I heard a conclusion. That answer cost him. Not loudly. Not immediately. But I saw Threx's jaw tighten, and I saw Crack's glance toward the observation glass as if asking permission to make the lesson public. The permission came in the cruelest form possible. The far wall lit up, revealing the long entrance to the breach corridor, a training lane nicknamed the funeral hall by recruits who thought humor made fear smaller. White panels, blind corners, noise generators, drone sensors, gravity pulses, emergency smoke. Every squad in the Alliance knew that corridor because every squad had lost pride inside it. Standard entry evaluation will begin, the speaker announced. Caleb looked at the open corridor. With my current gear? With your current gear, Threx said. Without squad support. Crax stepped closer, just enough to make sure every hidden camera caught the difference in size. Maybe the vent will carry you through. The room laughed then. Not all of them, but enough. The Valari tech did not laugh. He was still behind Caleb, clutching the recovered sensor pins with both hands. Caleb turned slightly toward him and lowered his voice. Stay away from that north panel for the next few minutes. The tech blinked. Why? Caleb did not answer, because the speaker cut in again. To compensate for candidate overanalysis, difficulty will be increased by 12%. That was unfair, but not illegal. Threx did not object. The council would call it adaptive pressure. Crax would call it entertainment. The records would call it science. Caleb only exhaled once, slow through his nose, then rolled his left shoulder like something old beneath the muscle had started talking back. He walked toward the corridor entrance without protest. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back at the observation. Glass. Not at Threx. Not at Crax. At the people hiding behind authority. Then the corridor lights turned red, the doors sealed at both ends, and the system announced, live evaluation begins in 5 seconds. The countdown reached 2 before Caleb stopped watching the corridor and looked back at the room he was supposed to forget. That was not how candidates behaved. Once the doors sealed, they stared forward, muscles tight, pride begging their bodies not to embarrass them. Caleb turned his head just enough to see the Valari tech still standing too close to the north panel, exactly where Caleb had told him not to be. The boy had moved a few feet away, but fear has a way of making the young choose the wrong corner. The corridor lights pulsed red. The drones woke behind the walls with a soft mechanical whine. Somewhere above us, coolant pumps kicked on, then coughed. I heard it that time. So did Caleb. His face changed, but only in the eyes. The tiredness went away. The politeness went away. What remained was not anger. It was recognition, hard and old. Move him, Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the bay. Crax laughed. Worry about yourself. Caleb did not look at him. Move him now. Commander Threx lifted one hand, stopping Crax before the insult became another performance. Candidate Walker, face the course. The observation speaker clicked on before Caleb could answer. Failure to comply will result in automatic disqualification. There it was. The clean little threat every institution loves. Obey the test, or lose your place. Obey the rule, or become the problem. Caleb stood inside the sealed entrance, one hand against the wall, eyes fixed on the north panel. A thin blue light had begun blinking beneath it, barely visible. The kind of warning maintenance crews notice after somebody gets blamed. The Valari tech looked down and finally saw it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The room went silent except for the machines. I remember the exact sound of Caleb's breathing. Slow, controlled. One breath in, one breath out. Then he said something so low my translator almost missed it. Not another locked door. He moved before anyone. Gave permission, not forward into the course. Sideways. His shoulder struck the inner service seam beside the corridor entrance, not hard enough to look dramatic, just precise enough that the panel popped half an inch from the frame. The system screamed at once. Route violation. Candidate disqualified. Caleb ignored it. He slid the bent recruit patch from his jacket, jammed the repaired clasp into the exposed seam, and twisted. The corridor drones launched behind him, but he had not entered their lane. He had entered the space between the lane and the wall, a maintenance gap too narrow for most armored species and too dark for the cameras to track cleanly. Pull him out, Threx ordered. Door controls are locked, I said, already at my console, suddenly less amused than I had been 10 seconds earlier. Caleb's voice came through the corridor microphone, calm and close to the wall. Life support manual override is mislabeled. Fire suppression is drawing from the same emergency line. I looked at the schematic. He was right. He could not have been right. The file said separate systems. The speaker from the observers snapped. Candidate Walker, return to the designated path immediately. Caleb did not. He reached the access junction from inside the wall, tore the emergency casing free, and rerouted the pressure release with 2 fast motions that looked less like guessing and more like memory. The blue warning under the north panel flashed white. The Valari tech stumbled back as a burst of harmless vapor rolled across the floor where he had been standing. Not fire, not an explosion, Just pressure. Enough to slam the panel open and make every officer behind the glass stop breathing. The bay alarms died one by one. Caleb stepped out of the maintenance gap with dust on his sleeve and the recruit patch bent almost flat in his hand. The system repeated, colder this time, candidate disqualified. Caleb looked at the shaken Valari tech, then at Threx. Fine. Nobody laughed. Even Krax stared at the north panel like it had just accused him. And for the first time that morning, Black Talon understood we had not tested a weak man. We had cornered a man who had already survived the thing we were pretending to simulate. They did not thank Caleb for saving the boy. That was the part one remember most clearly, because it should have been impossible to miss. The Valari tech was alive, shaking beside the rack, clutching his sensor case so tightly his fingers had gone pale blue, and the only thing the senior evaluators cared about was the broken test. The observation glass cleared for the first time, revealing 3 admirals, 2 council auditors, and 1 human diplomatic officer who looked like he wished he had stayed on his shuttle. Their faces carried the same expression polished officials always wear after being proven wrong in public. Not shame. Irritation. Candidate Walker violated course boundaries, damaged Alliance property, ignored direct orders, and compromised a classified evaluation system, the lead auditor said. Caleb stood beneath the bay lights with dust on one sleeve, the flattened recruit patch in his hand, and that old pain hiding somewhere under his ribs. He did not defend himself. He did not point at the boy. He did not say what every person in that room knew, which was that the north panel would have opened into a technician's chest if he had obeyed. Silence, I learned later, was not weakness with Caleb. It was discipline. He had the kind of silence that kept other people from seeing where the hurt landed. Krax should have been satisfied. He had wanted the human humiliated, and now the whole room was watching Caleb be reduced to a problem in a report. But Krax was not smiling anymore. He kept looking from the vapor mark on the floor to the maintenance gap Caleb had crawled through. He was trying to make the facts fit the version of the universe he preferred. They would not. Commander Threx stepped down from the platform. His voice was controlled. Walker, you are relieved from active evaluation pending review. Understood, Caleb said. One word again. Careful. Clean. The Valari tech suddenly stepped forward. Sir, he told me to move before the pressure line failed. The auditor did not even look at him. Technician, return to your station. The boy shrank. Caleb turned his head slightly, just enough for the tech to see him. He gave one small nod. Not encouragement exactly. Permission to survive the moment. That was when I began to dislike our side of the room. Caleb walked to the bench and gathered his duffel. Nobody helped him. The squad parted as he passed, not out of respect yet, but because no one knew what to do with a man who had been punished for doing the right thing. At the exit, security demanded his patch. He placed it in the guard's palm without argument, but the clasp was bent beyond repair now, crushed from being used as a tool instead of a symbol. There was something painfully human about that. Taking the thing meant to label him and using it to keep someone else safe. The door opened to the outer corridor. Cold white light spilled across his boots. Then the human diplomatic officer finally found his voice behind the glass. Walker, this incident may terminate your liaison appointment permanently. Caleb stopped. For a moment, his hand went to the inner pocket of his jacket. The photograph. Porch railing. Sunlight. The little girl with missing front teeth. He did not take it out. He just pressed his fingers there, like checking that some part of home had not been confiscated too. Then he looked back, not at the admirals, not at Threx, not even at Krax. He looked at the Valari tech, still breathing because Caleb had chosen disobedience over permission. Then make the report accurate, Caleb said softly. I would do it again. The door closed behind him, and for the first time since I joined Black Talon, the room felt smaller without the person we had thrown out. The corridor outside Bay 9 was colder than the training room, and Caleb noticed because cold made old injuries honest. He walked alone beneath a strip of ceiling lights that flickered every 40 feet, duffel strap cutting into his palm, boots making the soft rubber sound of someone trying not to disturb a building that had already decided he did not belong. The station recycled its air too aggressively. Everything smelled faintly of metal, disinfectant, and rain that had never touched dirt. He stopped beside a narrow window where the planet below turned slowly under sheets of silver cloud. For a while, he did nothing. That was the part none of the reports would ever capture. Not the silence. Not the way his left hand trembled once before he curled it into a fist. Not the way he pressed 2 fingers against the inner pocket of his jacket, checking the photograph without taking it out, as if the paper itself might forgive him for still being alive. Inside that pocket was a porch in Ohio, a crooked summer railing, and his niece Lily holding 2 fingers behind his brother's head. She had been 7 when the colony alarms failed on Meridian Ridge. Caleb had not been a soldier then. Not officially. He had been a rescue coordinator with a cheap helmet, a bad knee, and a voice on the radio telling frightened people to keep breathing until he reached them. The Alliance report later called the loss unavoidable. Caleb remembered it differently. He remembered a sealed service door. He remembered a child asking if the lights would come back on. He remembered promising yes before he knew whether yes was still available. After that, he learned buildings. Not weapons first. Not rank. Buildings. Airflow. Pressure lines. Maintenance shortcuts. The quiet ways a place tells you it is about to betray the people inside it. Back in Bay 9, when that blue light blinked under the north panel, he had not seen a malfunction. He had seen Meridian again. And the worst thing about memory was that it did not ask permission before making a choice for you. Behind him, the corridor door opened. Caleb did not turn. Heavy steps approached, slow enough to be respectful, too heavy to be human. For one foolish second, I thought Threx had come to arrest him. It was not Threx. It was the Valari tech, small in the wide hallway, still holding the sensor case against his chest like a shield. "Mr. Walker," the boy said. His voice shook, then steadied because Caleb looked over and gave him room to be brave. "You told me to move before the warning came up." Caleb shifted the duffel to his other hand. "You moved? That is the important part." The boy looked down. "They will not put that in the report." Caleb almost smiled. Almost. They usually do not. Rain moved across the window in long pale streaks, though outside there was only atmosphere and machine condensation. For a moment, the 3 of us stood there in the kind of quiet that makes people tell the truth or run from it. Then the tech reached into his case and pulled out a sensor pin, one of the same tiny pieces Caleb had picked up from the floor. "This was active during the evaluation," he whispered. It recorded local audio before the system wiped the Bay feed. Caleb's expression did not change, but his shoulders went still. The boy placed the pin in his hand. A red light blinked once beneath its glass surface, and from the tiny speaker came the lead auditor's voice, recorded before the test began, saying, "Increase pressure until the human breaks." The sensor pin played the sentence twice because the Valari tech's fingers shook and accidentally tapped the glass again. "Increase pressure until the human breaks." The second time, the words sounded worse. Not louder. Cleaner. Official cruelty always sounds cleaner when it has no background noise to hide inside. Caleb closed his hand around the pin, not hard enough to damage it, just enough to make the little red light disappear between his fingers. "Who else heard this?" he asked. The boy looked toward Bay 9. "Only me. And maybe the local backup cache, unless they wiped that too." Caleb nodded, and I saw the decision settle into him like weight he had carried before. He did not storm back. He did not demand justice in the hallway. He walked to the bay door, pressed the access pad with 2 fingers, and waited while the system denied him entry. Then he looked at me through the small security window. I do not know why I opened it. Maybe because I had watched the vapor mark on the floor. Maybe because I had heard the word functional and understood it meant wounded, but still useful. Maybe because, for the first time that day, the human was not the one who looked dangerous. The room inside had changed while he was gone. The auditors were arguing with Threx. Krax stood near the north panel, staring at the pale mark where the pressure burst had rolled out. The Valari tech slipped in behind Caleb and placed the sensor pin on. My console before courage could leave him. I connected it to the local cache. The first file was the auditor's order. The second was worse. A maintenance overlay appeared above the bay, and every line Caleb had questioned lit up red. Fire suppression, life support, emergency pressure release, all tied together through an unauthorized bypass installed 6 hours before his arrival. 6 hours. Not a design flaw. Not an accident. A trap wearing a training uniform. The room fell quiet in layers. First the squad, then the officers, then the glass booth. Caleb stood beside the console with his hands at his sides, letting the evidence speak because he already knew nobody wanted his voice. "That is impossible," the lead auditor said, but his face had gone flat. Threx stepped toward the map. This schematic was certified yesterday. The public schematic was, Caleb said. This one was edited after certification. Cracks turned on him. How would you know that? Caleb looked at the pressure line, then at the sealed maintenance door, then at the blinking emergency grid above it. Because whoever built this made the same mistake Meridian Ridge made. Nobody spoke. I searched the name before the auditors could stop me. The file opened with a civilian colony, a failed evacuation, sealed service doors, and a rescue coordinator who entered after the official teams withdrew. Caleb Walker. Not infantry. Not shock combat. Rescue operations. Structural collapse response. 214 civilians extracted before the final lockdown. The last page was sealed by human command, but the summary was visible. Recommended for cross-species unit evaluation, not as candidate, but as field assessor for catastrophic systems failure and command ethics under pressure. I read it once. Then I read it again, because my mind refused to accept the shape of it. We had not been evaluating him. He had been sent to evaluate us. Caleb did not smile. He looked smaller somehow, standing under the lights with that duffel at his feet and the photograph still hidden in his jacket. I did not come here to embarrass Black Talon, he said. I came because someone in this building is comfortable locking doors and calling it procedure. The words landed harder than any accusation. Threx's command plates caught the white light as he slowly turned from the corrupted schematic to the human he had dismissed, and for the first time since I had known him, Commander Threx Vero had no order ready. For several seconds, Commander Threx did not move, and that silence did more to change the room than any speech could have. Threx had built his entire life on clean categories. Soldier, recruit, threat, asset, failure. He trusted records because records did not shake, did not grieve, did not carry porch photographs in jacket pockets. Data had kept his squad alive through storms of bad decisions made by people far above him. But now the data on my console was glowing red with a lie installed 6 hours earlier, and the man he had dismissed as fragile had been the only one who listened to the building before it betrayed a child. The lead auditor recovered first, because men like him always do. This material is preliminary, he said, smoothing his uniform as if the wrinkle was the real emergency. The candidate is not authorized to interpret Alliance infrastructure, and the recording was obtained through improper channels. Caleb looked at him, not angry, not surprised. Then authorized someone else to tell the truth. That was all. No demand for apology. No performance. Just a sentence with nowhere to hide. The Valari tech stared at the floor, terrified that his own bravery might have ruined him. Caleb noticed, of course he did. He stepped half a pace sideways, placing himself between the boy and the glass booth without making it obvious enough to shame him. I saw Threx see it too. That was the moment his face changed. Not because Caleb had outsmarted a system. Because Caleb protected people even while standing accused. Cracks shifted his weight beside the north panel. For once, he looked less like a weapon and more like someone remembering every time he had laughed because it was easier than admitting he was afraid. He warned the tech, Cracks said. His voice came rough, reluctant, but clear. Before the alarm. Before any of us saw it. The auditor turned sharply. Operator. Cracks, you are not being asked for testimony. Cracks looked at him, then at the vapor mark on the floor. You should have asked earlier. Nobody laughed at that. Threx walked to the console and placed his command seal beside the corrupted schematic. The seal activated with a low chime, transferring the evidence into official record where even auditors had difficulty burying it. Black Talon Command accepts responsibility for the evaluation environment, Threx said. The words cost him. I could hear it. Responsibility was not a shield in his mouth. It was weight. Pending formal investigation, candidate Walker's disqualification is suspended. The lead auditor's skin went pale gray. Commander, that exceeds your authority. No, Threx said quieter now. It uses it. Then he turned to Caleb. Not fully enough to kneel to sentiment. Not dramatically enough for the cameras, but enough that everyone in Bay 9 understood something had shifted. Mr. Walker, you were placed in an unfair test and responded to a real hazard. I mistook caution for weakness. That error was mine. Caleb held his gaze. He did not soften just because the apology finally arrived. What happens to the technician? Threx glanced at the boy. He remains under Black Talon protection until this investigation is complete. And the report? Caleb asked. Threx looked back at the observation booth. will state that the human candidate identified a compromised safety system, prevented injury, preserved evidence, and acted within the moral obligations of any soldier worthy of the uniform. The words settled over the bay, warm and heavy. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Something better. A beginning with teeth. Caleb reached into his pocket and, for the first time, took out the photograph. He looked at it only once before putting it away again, but his hand was steadier when it left the jacket. The Valari tech stepped closer to him. Krax did not move aside this time. He moved with them. One by one, the rest of Black Talon crossed the floor until Caleb was no longer standing alone beneath the lights. Behind the glass, an inquiry chamber door opened, and Threx pulled out the chair at its head for Caleb. Walker. By morning, Bay 9 looked different, though nothing physical had changed. The same white floor reflected the same ceiling lights. The same north panel sat crooked in its frame, tagged for repair, with a pale vapor mark still brushed across the floor like a ghost of what almost happened. The difference was where everyone chose to stand. The Valari tech no longer hid behind equipment. He stood near Caleb Walker with his badge visible, nervous but upright, and when the inquiry officers entered, he spoke first. His voice shook at the beginning. By the end, it did not. He told them about the warning light, the pressure line, the sensor pin, and the man who moved him out of danger before anyone important believed there was danger at all. Caleb did not interrupt. He sat in the chair Threx had pulled out for him, hands folded, duffel beside his boots, looking less like a defendant than a tired man waiting for weather to pass. The inquiry lasted 2 hours. Nobody raised their voice after the first 20 minutes because the evidence did not need volume. The corrupted schematic, the unauthorized bypass, the recording, the sealed file from Meridian Ridge. Each piece entered the room quietly and removed another excuse. The lead auditor tried to speak about procedure until Threx placed his own after-action record on the table. 1 page. No ornament. No defense. It stated that Black Talon had allowed bias, reputation, and bad data to override direct observation. It stated that Caleb Walker had acted with restraint, clarity, and moral courage. It stated that any unit unable to recognize those traits had no right to call itself elite. Watching Threx sign that report was like watching a mountain admit it had cast the wrong shadow. Krax stood behind him the entire time, silent, arms locked behind his back. When the inquiry ended, the officers left through the side door without looking at Caleb. That was fine. Respect from embarrassed officials usually arrives late and dressed as paperwork. The squad remained. For a while, no one knew what to do with the quiet. Then Krax walked to the security guard at the exit and held out one massive hand. The guard hesitated. Before placing the bent recruit patch into his palm, Krax carried it back to Caleb, not dropped this time, not tossed, not offered as a joke. He held it flat with both hands. "You used this better than we did," he said. Caleb looked at the twisted metal. The clasp was ruined. The surface was scratched. It would never sit clean on any uniform again. He took it anyway. It held long enough. Krax lowered his head once. Not a bow. Not quite. But close enough that every camera in the room understood. Threx turned to the wall display and deleted the word candidate from Caleb's temporary record. In its place, he entered Field Assessor, Human Command Liaison, Black Talon Protected Witness. Then he paused, glanced back at the squad, and added one more line. Operational Advisor, Provisional. No one objected. Not even me. Especially not me. When Caleb finally left Bay 9, sunlight from the station's morning cycle spilled across the corridor in long gold bars, warmer than the artificial rain on the windows, warmer than anything that room had deserved. The Valari tech opened the door for him. Krax stepped aside. Threx gave the smallest salute I had ever seen him give, and somehow it carried the weight of a battlefield. Caleb touched the photograph in his pocket once, then kept walking. From that day forward, Black Talon still trained in silence, still frightened recruits, still carried a reputation sharp enough to empty hallways. But whenever a human checked the vents before the weapons, nobody laughed. We had learned that kindness was not softness. Sometimes it was the first sign that someone had already seen the disaster coming.